It's good to see everybody today, and we are back live on IBM Expert TV, and we are with the experts. Right after the holiday break, we got my co-host Laura Edell. Laura, it is always good to see you.
Oh, always good to see you too, Darren. I feel like it's been a minute, but I know we just saw each other not that long ago.
It's so good, and we always bring experts. And I forgot to shut my phone. We always bring experts, and today's expert is going to be John Lafleaur, who is the CEO. I'm sorry, the co-founder and COO of let me try that again, the COO and co-founder of
There you go.
Airbyte. It's great to see you, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Darren. Hi, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Of
Definitely
course.
welcome.
Yeah. And what we try to do is we always try to be thoughtful as we put together the shows. And the show theme today is about community. And when I was thinking about community, I think it's a word we kind of just always just throw out there, like, let's build a community. Let's be part of a community. And it got me thinking. I got to spend time with John before the show and prepping for the show. I think community sometimes just starts with one person. I mean, someone has to have the belief of, I think I could change something. I think I can make an impact. And that person convinces another person. And then it's another person. And I've always felt like maybe community starts when you're too big for a conference room, or maybe community starts when you're too big for a restaurant. But it starts with one person and a belief. And today's a meaningful episode because John is the co-founder of a company that minutes ago, days ago, months ago was an idea. It wasn't one of those, hey, let's do $1 million in revenue and then build the community. Hey, let's get to community in 5 years. So I've got so many questions. Laura, I know, has a ton of questions. So I mean, we've both been at big brands that have big member communities, and I'm sure those are the big aspirations. And John, what I thought we'd start with is kind of your story, as not so much as the community builder, but more of like the human who had stayed up at night thinking about this idea, was crazy enough to apply to YC Gets In. And I'm sure there was a lot of sleepless nights before and during, but love for you to walk us through that story of, why did you apply? When you started to, see that traction, what were those emotions like? And then we're going to kind of get into what you're doing and what you're building. But I really want to start with the first person, because you can't start that community without a one person. And I'm picking you as that person.
So we actually pivoted after YC. We applied for another idea.
I love that even more.
So yeah, and so we got YC, spent like 6 months on a product, raised this like a pre-seed, pivoted away from that 1 month after the pre-seed, spent like 6 weeks in exploration. During these 6 weeks, we just did a ton of customer interviews, and we got that insight of Airbyte. And we continued, like we always did customer discovery a lot. And I think that helped. That's the initiation of the community, finding people who have the same problems, who are facing the same problems. So once we figured out, like, okay, there's an open source approach to the problem we're solving, that's how we were actually reaching out to people. And the response rate was like way higher. So we saw that there was a need for that. And then for us, it was, if you do it open source, you need to go all the way. That means that it is a company that will be community powered, community first, and like product will follow community.
Totally agree.
So we had a Slack, open Slack, public Slack, even though before the website. Then we have the only thing you could see at the website was a Slack, and you had all the team on the Slack, and you could join. It was public, and at that point, it was all about getting people to buy in our vision and to trust us. And the way we were thinking about this is that we needed to be fully transparent, so that they can believe what we're saying. And second is we need to have a vision that was bold enough to get interest. And after that, it was all about building that trust. And the way to do it was proximity, like proximity with the founders. Like we had office hours at the beginning with Michelle, my co-founder, and I, like every week. You could just talk to us anytime. And also every week we were shipping things. That's the last thing, velocity. And that's how we started to get the community growing. So we started on this idea in July, end of July 2020. We released the first version of open source in end of September, October, and started to have the community growing like from November.
It's amazing. But when you started, and there's a lot of founders that listen to the show, there's technologists and scientists and tinkerers. What was it like when you started seeing the Slack number grow to 20? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, sure. It's the journey of an entrepreneur is that your highs are very highs and lows are very low. So sure, you've got very high highs, definitely. And the question is always the same. You for any product, you always have activation, but what matters is really retention.
Right.
Fair.
And it's the same for community. Like we were not looking at like Slack signups. We're looking at weekly active Slack members.
Like how active they are on your, what are they doing? Yeah.
And that was okay. It's a demonstration that they had more than interest. They had like kind of conviction and commitment. I think the very good high was the first contribution, the first PR on our product. That was great, a great thing.
And now
that's true. I was just thinking of the very first time in my GitHub repo where I have just any machine learning I've ever built, I share with the world. And the very first time I had my first pull or PR request, I felt the same way. I felt so much pride. Like that community feeling is very strong. And when you get more and more engagement, I guess there is that pride of ownership and then sharing with the world. How do you continue that though? How do you keep the stickiness there, or how have you?
That's a great question. So developer experience, I'd say it's still the same. It's buying the vision, the velocity. Like we have a public roadmap, so people buy into that. Like that, the fact that we want to solve data integration, and then it's so you have gimmicks to try to incentivize them more. For instance, when you do a pull request, you get points, you get levels. We've got a leaderboard, these kind of things. We send swag as well.
Gamify, smart.
Yeah. But you need to have that foundation first, and then you can build on top of that.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point, because I think it's something I want to just spend a little bit of time on, because it's so quick you would have missed it. So not only do you have a community, but there are these pillars. It sounds like you set up for the community. One is proximity to the founders, and we are so grateful that you even made time to be on the show. Then you have transparency, velocity, and I know there's one other. I thought there was four, right?
The vision, yeah.
And the vision, which is the one how you got to one to many. Now, one of the things that you're doing with transparency, and Laura, I'm going to have Wyatt share this because it's very rare that I see this. This is still a young company sharing their roadmap, Laura. This is their roadmap. This is not from their pitch deck. This is not from their board deck. This is their roadmap saying, copy me. Go. I dare you. This is how good we are.
They actually share their pitch deck as well, by the way. I think, if you want to talk about embodying open source, I have to say I'm a little not as surprised as you, Darren. I had an expectation coming into a company that is founded on open source principles that they would have transparency. Now, that could be my own ideals of where I want the world to be, but I am very grateful and glad you shared it. But I was very impressed when I saw that you shared your pitch deck as well, helping others learn from, the challenges and wins that you've had yourself. So
there's a thought process also to it. In open source, it's a winner take all in the end. Because there's a network effect with your contributors. The more contributors you have, the more attractive you are to new contributors. So for us, like the open source war, if we can call it a war, is already done. We won it. So now it's just about getting more people interested, awareness, and all of that.
Mike, that was a mic drop right there, everyone. That was a mic drop. Hey, so is there something you want to highlight to the audience, whether it be in Q2, because we're like minutes away from ending Q2, Q3 this is the roadmap, everybody. It's on the website. We'll put it in the notes. But is there something on the roadmap you want to highlight that you want to talk about today?
So because we're pretty new, there's no magic. We have our connectors. So right now we've got 185 connectors.
185, awesome.
Okay. Yeah. And I think like out of the 80 last, there's 70 coming from the community, to be honest. So the team is really focusing on making that connectors more reliable, higher quality. And we have 3 states of connectors: alpha, beta, and GA. GA has an SLA. And something that the community has been waiting for is our database connectors: Postgres, MySQL, MS SQL, and getting them to GA with support of CDC, schema evolution, all of those things. And this is like coming, I would say, like Postgres should be coming end of July, and MySQL and MySQL should follow after that. But this has been waited for a long time.
I love it. And I see also Q3 is self-service, enterprise. I think there's already a waiting list for enterprise, which is pretty sweet. And anything you want to talk about self-service, then we're going to, after this, we'll have Wyatt not share, but anything else you want to hype you want to tease the audience with?
So Q3, it'll be also the multi-cloud. So being on AWS, being able also to address Europe, for instance. Airbyte Cloud right now is more in the US today. But also it'll be Airbyte's API and CLI, meaning that there's a lot of open source users that leverage Airbyte through our API. So in operational use cases, or like if you want to trigger 1,000 connections, well, you would rather have an API instead of a UI. And Airbyte Cloud is only available through the UI today. So that will change coming Q3. And reverse ETL should be coming in Q4. And in Q4, what we'll do, if you can see that in hybrid deployment, is that we're going to separate the data plane from the control plane, meaning that you can have the data plane also in your own virtual private cloud, your own AWS or GCP.
That's so good. And Wyatt, thank you for sharing that. So we were talking about community, and I just want to just keep on one more thing on that community. When you do these announcements, and you're sharing the roadmap, you have the release. Right now, we're still in a remote world.
Yep.
Before the show, Laura was sharing us the story that she was just in Las Vegas, presenting on some of the fine work she's doing with the
sustainability sustainability efforts to help some of the stadiums and professional sports teams achieve their own carbon neutral or carbon negative goals in a certain time frame. And so it was very exciting to be recognized by one of those teams. And so, yes, coming back from Vegas, that's why I sound a little bit hoarse.
And it just made me think about, now we're going community, and I know it's great that we have a Discord channel, we have a Slack and Git. How are you going to bring people together now as the world continues to open? Is there any thoughts on that? And also on this riff, also thoughts about how you're thinking about, again, employee wellness as you're growing in this interesting time. I mean, Elon from Tesla tweeted today, it's time to come back to work. I don't know if you saw that tweet. So just a lot. I mean, you're co-founder. You have these big problems. Like there's a lot to those questions. There's 3 questions in there. Pick up any one you want. Really, it's about getting people together in person.
Yeah, especially since we're growing the team from 30 to almost 200 by the end of the year. We're already at 80, and so this is really top of mind for us. And so we were born into a remote first world.
Yeah.
So I'd say one third of the team is in the Bay Area, 1/3 is in the rest of the US, 1/3 is international. So we're remote first. But we opened our first actually office in San Francisco. I'm in our office today. And what is great with Zoom and remote is that it's really great for execution, like priorities and execution. But what we find is that it's not as great as in person for serendipitous conversations, so like creativity. And also, of course, like in real life, building relationships as well. So our goal is, how do we create serendipity in a remote context? And so what we're doing typically, you have offsite retreats. So company-wide, we've got team retreats as well that are coming as well. And we have also what we call a travel with purpose policy, meaning that you can go anywhere it's refunded by the company to work with another teammate. And what we see happening with the team is that they're organizing these trips. Like there was 2 weeks ago, there was a trip in New York, and there would like 15 people would go in New York. And the next one is in London, and like 20 people would go in London. So they do that together, and that creates that serendipity. So when you do team retreats, it's intentional. You want to create serendipity within these teams. But right now, with this travel with purpose, it's really random serendipity. So it's very complementary. And
I gotta tell you, I learned something new, Laura. We got to take that for your team. Like, Laura, travel with purpose.
Oh no, I love the idea of letting them come together and pick where they're going to go, and then having them plan it out and having these micro retreats. I think that's a brilliant idea. To bring teams together, especially leading a data science organization, and hiring most of them through the pandemic where nobody had met anybody, and working on very large as an incubated team, even though we're at Microsoft, still working on very much new sets of technology, new algorithms. Sustainability is not something that we've, cracked yet. And then none of us had met each other. And so it was one of those beautiful things. The first time I flew out to Washington to meet a large portion of the team, and it was just amazing. It's like, oh my gosh, you're so much taller than I realized. It's small things, like I'm 5'11" and no one knew that. And shoes, I'm like 6'1". I mean, I'm very, very tall. And so, it's those small things that you don't pick up when you're, this all day long. The other thing, I think you made that point, which is those we call hallway conversations, or the water cooler moments. We tried having those, but there are moments that are awkward for people. Those that I'm neurodiverse, I have dyslexia, and so I don't always process things in the same way that others do, and that can make others feel uncomfortable when we're on camera because of tricks I have to do to make sure I've heard somebody correctly. And so it's little things like that you don't appreciate as much until you're in a moment like the pandemic and step out and then have those moments together, which it sounds like your team is doing quite serendipitously well, of coming together in these cities. And I love that. I'm definitely stealing that idea as a way to have teams plan offsites.
I agree, because you can plan serendipity, but you can plan a trip. I mean, that is, and then the output is the great work. Versus you come to work, let's make sure you get to work. I think that's great. The other thing we wanted to talk about, when we talk about velocity and we talk about the modern data stack, do you think it's not too early, but did you think you have the right time? Do you think if this was 6 months later, you would have missed the window? Do you think 6 months earlier it'd have been too early? Because I think velocity is important, but I think you might have just been at the right place at the right time to get to the velocity, right? I don't know. I just putting that founder hat on. And again, you're a 3-4 time founder, so you've seen too early, too late. But what are your thoughts on velocity and the modern data stack?
I think as a founder, you wish you started 6 months earlier, because you always want to have your product in a more mature state, or with those features that are coming in the next 6 months. You wish you have them today. So I can't think of any founder that would say 6 months earlier. No, not the right timing, because 6 months is not big enough to say it won't be the right timing, I'd say. So definitely for 6 months earlier. 6 months later, that's a very good question. I can't imagine a world where we will be like 6 months back, because we made so much progress in the last 6 months that it's hard to say, wow.
How long was the YC? Was it 3 months?
3 months, yeah.
3 months, right? So you're in YC for 3 months, accepted for a different solution, product vision, but still charming founder, and still same co-founder, so still same core team. And you make it look so easy. Hey, we went to YC, and then we just did a couple of, community discoveries, and next thing you know, it's just, there's just a lot there, and that's why just the timing and how you qualify, I think there's just a lot there, and I just wish you could share more of that with everyone that's tinkering or maybe wants to leave their job, because I'm sort of rant on this. It's a misleading signal, because sometimes you can signal like, hey, it took me like only 6 months to figure this out, and I'm glad I left my job. And we're like, don't leave your job, anyone listening, that if you think it's 6 weeks and you're going to build a company. But walk us through some other things to that. And Laura, chime in as you hear this, because this goes back also to some imposter syndrome. But you killed it, and it looks like with ease, but it wasn't with ease.
So for the first product we had, we were struggling in the sense that we understood that we were a nice to have, meaning that if we know the analogy of being an aspirin, so Advil, versus like a painkiller versus a vitamin. Like a vitamin would get you like 15-20% better, but that you don't have a pain, and that makes you a nice to have. So that makes you that you have a very hard time selling in the end. And we discovered that we were this. So that's when we decided to pivot away from that. And we explored like 15, 16 ideas from it. And we still raised our round before, based on the vision we had, before we understood that we were nice to have. And I can tell you that was a hard process, definitely.
Right.
And I feel that when you have product market fit, it's easy to spot in the sense that everything becomes easier. Inbound everything becomes easier. Even conversation with investors at that point. So, for instance, for Airbyte, every time we had conversations with investors, we time box like our seed with Axel in 2 weeks. Say, okay, you know what, you want to have a conversation with us. Our V2 our V0.2 will be in beginning of November. Let's have a conversation 2 weeks after. And we got like 45 investors in the same 2 weeks. And Axel was number 42. So there were like a lot of FOMO because they were late to the game. And I think, so my advice, for instance, is that for investors typically is that you need to create FOMO. So time box that, have them all the calls the same week if possible, because there's sense competition at that point. But so I think there's no easy, there's always intention. So even if we had a great product, if you don't have the right intention, you don't do it right, it won't be as easy.
Yeah.
I love that. Somebody said a quote to me once, which was, be less intense and more intentional. And I just think that's such a great quote, because you think about feeling overwhelmed by people, by scenarios sometime. And I just remind myself of that, having that clarity of your intentional purpose and being clear about it to others can really help, sell, obviously, and get that series funding. But, I think it's very valid. Prior to Microsoft, I worked at a startup that was named Tidemark. It was their second or third, attempt. And this is, cloud-based budgeting and planning. And, we were working on the algorithms for the first time. This is pre where we are today. So, rewind back 8 years. And, algorithms at the time, they sold this off to another company. And I remember them saying to me, no one's ever going to use forecasting for budgeting and planning. This is a manual world. And I remember sitting there thinking, as a data scientist, like, you're going to miss the mark. And so you're buying this software that I cared so much about, the startup. I was an early part of that team. And it was so disappointing to know that they just didn't see a vision. And now I see where they've taken in bits and pieces of it and the algorithms, and they've incorporated it into another product, and that's great. But it's funny to me when I hear people not see the vision where I so clearly see where it's going. Have you ever had moments where you see so clearly the value and the purpose, whether it's through Airbyte or something else? Have you had those conversations where the others just aren't there yet to see that future? And how do you help sell that future in a way that is clear and intentional?
I think that's to you, John.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. Okay, so I would advise companies to always be more transparent in the sense that you have actually nothing to lose, in the sense that you create goodwill a lot, and that is in branding. And so even if you're disclosing some information to your competitor, that goodwill and branding they will never get back.
That's a good part.
I do have to say your branding is pretty sticky. I like to think of my podcast branding as being very sticky. I love it. But I saw yours and I was like, this is very clever. It pulled me in right away. Just the color, I don't know, is that an octopus? I don't know what the creature is. Okay.
It is. Okay, yeah.
I found myself wanting to engage more because it spoke to the brand aesthetic that I value very, very highly. So I agree with you. I think your brand really speaks value.
Yeah. I think, I think where how we started this show is how I felt when I've interacted with the brand and the founders. It really started with one, and the language and the tone, it's personable. It just feels transparent and real. And it's easy to see why people want to join that march. But you're right, you got to ship. You got to deliver. And the fact that you have so many connectors, because the connectors change. And we all have happy customers. We all have unhappy customers. They're depending on us. They are sending they're doing so much data through Airbyte. It's crazy. And guess what? When Salesforce changes their API, they're not calling John, right? They're not, right? So John doesn't have gray hairs yet, but he does. So
COVID or Airbyte, I don't know which one.
So now I want to go back again in time. You kind of started and you built out these connectors. Which were your first 3 or 5? And do you wish you did a different 3 or 5? I mean, right now you're killing it, right? But if you had to go back to those first 3 or first 5, which ones were they? How'd you get there? Do you wish you did a different set?
So we wanted to have a diverse pool of connectors. Okay. So there was Stripe, Postgres, or Snowflake. So an API source, a database source, a destination like warehouse, and we had also Postgres as a destination. So destination databases. That was the first 4. And the goal was to build internally to be able to address those different use cases because they're different and create learning. It's all about learning at the beginning.
Yeah. No, I think.
I'm curious, are you using, or what are your thoughts on this idea of AI applied towards product development? So, now leveraging, for things like COBOL migrations, now using, AI to write those lines of code to help you look up and see if there's patterns that can then be blocked out and scripted. So it's not such a manual heavy lift. Similarly, with a product that is cloud born, that is built from the ground up in this modern age, are you leveraging, behind the scenes, any sort of, algorithms to help you? Or is that, a future state of where you want to get to? Or is it not at all part of the plan?
So we're not using anything AI-based, but what we're doing is 80% of the connectors are actually, 80% of what a connector is actually similar across all connectors. Mm-hmm. And so what we're building is a connector development kit, a CDK, that enables you to actually only focus on the 20% that is unique.
That's unique.
And that is a tool that we leverage extensively internally, but we also offer to the community. So instead of taking like 2 days to create a new connector as a third-party company, it takes you like 1-2 hours. And the goal, what is great with this is that it standardizes also the way connectors are being built, which makes maintaining much easier at that point.
Absolutely. Because imagine you now have that 20%, that's where you have to edit the code, knowing that. And then the 80%, I would imagine, is what you're maintaining as part of the commonality of, say, the platform.
Yes and no, but it makes things a lot easier. And the moonshot for us is to actually make it like, for you to, it would take you 15 to 30 minutes to just create a connector.
Beautiful.
And that's how you can really address the long tail of connectors and have thousands of connectors is by starting with this. If you don't start with this, that means all your connectors that you've built in the past are not on that CDK. And that means either you need to migrate that to the CDK or you need to maintain them like in a non-standardized way, which is not scalable at all.
No, actually, and now that you say that, from a scale perspective, you're right. If you think about all of the products that came before you, and maybe even somebody that you think of as a competitor now, one of the biggest limitations I've found with the data integration space has been we have thousands of connectors. Well, there's always a limit. And well, what if I have the 1,001th and you don't have that one covered, and now I have to custom build from scratch, and then that becomes a huge lift for me.
Yeah.
To me, it feels like that's a very big benefit of Airbyte, is that, like you said, you can now churn out these connectors not only in a fast speed of time, but I'd imagine you can now extensively scale pretty limitlessly to cover a gamut of different ones that may come on board and become important at that relevant time. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it's a very fair statement. The three differentiators we have is, so the long tail of connectors, I'd say like for instance, 5tran is like the leader in the market, and they have only 170 connectors. That's been 9 years. Well, already at 185 in open source. And so the differentiator is that's a long tail, but even more importantly is that's customizability, because our connectors are open source. You can take any connectors that exist and just customize it to the way you need, because every data infrastructure is like unique. They all need customization, which they cannot do with the current solutions in the market, the other solutions in the market. And the third differentiator, which is a separate one from connectors, is a pricing model. All the other solutions are row-based, but for databases where you have most of your data and you have hundreds of millions of rows there, it's just prohibitive. It's incompatible. And we have a compute-based pricing model. And because databases, they replicate at 20 times the speed of APIs, that makes it possible again.
And that also makes sense for what, when you talked about earlier, separating your control plane and having these planes separated, it also, feeds into that architecture.
We'd like to have you, John. We'd like to have you back, John.
Thank you, Darren.
And Laura, like easy to follow, right? John is easy. There's people that can set out a vision that can just get people around it. John, you have that aura about you. I can see why people follow you. Laura, what are your thoughts on that as well?
I think it's the San Francisco office aura around him. That's where I was born. So, as soon as he said that, I liked him immediately. No, I agree. I think there is a very good aura around you, John.
Thank you.
All right. Well, this is the IBM Expert TV show. This is Darren Kaplan. I'm with my co-host Laura Edell and our special guest, John Lafleaur. He's with Airbyte. And what we talked today was about importance of community. But when we really think about community, it's not just community. It's about transparency. It's about, which I love, accessibility to the founders. It's about velocity. And the most important thing is why we're part of the community, the vision. The vision. And John, congratulations on the success to now. And we are only wishing you even more success and hopefully some sleep. I can't promise the sleep, but you look great and stay healthy. And thanks for being on the show. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. And we'll add the links to John and all the information to John and how to join the Airbyte Slack community, plus get some of the self-serve tooling and get yourself on the waiting list for the cloud solution. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.